From the window where I work in Yokosuka, Kanagawa, I can easily see Mount Fuji. I can see it every day because sometimes the mountain is covered in clouds. Yet, Mount Fuji's cone shape is an iconic symbol, a point in the distance, a mountain I have climbed, and even when shrouded in clouds, is a neighbor. But what if the mountain suddenly disappeared or changed? Recently, we had to go through one of our quarterly trainings. In the training, we were given a scenario where Mount Fuji had unpredictably erupted. Mount Fuji is an active volcano. And since it is close enough to where I work, we could be impacted. Assuming no preparation and it suddenly erupted, what would we do? Should we vacate the building or remain where we were? Yokosuka United States Naval Base is on the northeastern side of Kanagawa Peninsula along Tokyo Bay, and thus separated by the contours of geography from the predicted lava flow. Instead of vacating, in the training we were advised to remain where we were rather than venturing outside. Our instinct might be to go outside and take pictures. Instead, we were informed that we were to remain where we were and to stay away from the windows. Depending on the size of the eruption, we could be pummeled by ash and pumice stones. Now these trainings are to help us on the base become more situationally aware and alert. Different circumstances and conditions call for different responses from us. Jesus would agree. In fact, that is one perspective Jesus is saying to the disciples in Luke chapter 21, our gospel. At this point in the narrative, Jesus is just days away from dying on the cross, and as a result, his focus has shifted to preparing the disciples for the world they would be living in after his death. According to what we hear today, the disciples had taken a moment to marvel at the temple, an all-important center of worship, one of the wonders of the ancient world. King Herod the Great had started rebuilding an already impressive temple nearly 40 years before. Historians such as Josephus tell us that it was indeed impressive, made to shine in the sun, constructed with massive stones, decorated with gifts from foreign countries, with doors and gates of the finest quality. In comparison, the stones at its base were larger than anything used for the Great Pyramids in Egypt or anything in Rome. But Jesus interrupts the disciples' observance of the buildings by boldly stating that a time was coming when the temple towering over them would come crashing to the ground. As for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down. It sounded absurd at that time. Undaunted, Jesus continues. It will be a time when the earth itself shakes. There will be struggles between nations, the fall of great powers, and even persecution for those following me. It is coming. It is as if Jesus is saying we need to survey the situation. We need to be aware of our conditions and respond accordingly. We need to assess what is happening and stay aware. Well, as you know, in AD 70, the very temple to which Jesus referred was in fact destroyed. Along with Jerusalem's fall came the disturbance of temple worship and the persecution of these Jewish Christians. exactly as Jesus said. But his words stretched beyond that first century into a future that even lies ahead of us. Jesus calls us 21 centuries later to readiness, watchfulness, and faith-filled situational awareness. Why? Because in these times, we as his followers have an opportunity. This will give you an opportunity to testify. Furthermore, Jesus tells us things may get worse before they get better. For me, this makes me wonder, what does it look like to live with this situational awareness Jesus encourages? Specifically, how do we keep our guard up, our eyes open? How do we know when it's the time to run and when to testify? For me, there are two fundamental points. First, one, it's important for us to confess that many of us live as though we have the option of pretending that change will never happen. If we work on the U.S. Naval Base, we have no option to avoid training. It's an order. We are to be ready. However, as Christians, we have no mandatory readiness training. Rather than having any spiritual awareness, we may have situation apathy. We worship in a place and a time and a great country where our greatest inconvenience may be masks in worship or someone sitting in our place that we may like. We may have lost sight of the fact that the wars and the injustice happening outside these walls are important, not only for our prayers, but our awareness. We can become as impressed with our everyday lives as the disciples were with the Herodian temple. We may delude ourselves into thinking that our homes and lives are grounded, although we may not last forever, we know that. We all suffer from delusions of immortality. We cannot be indifferent, because Jesus tells his disciples and us that being engaged in this raging world will result in an opportunity to testify. What does that mean? Jesus tells us that as this broken world shows itself in many forms, from pleasant autumnal days to all kinds of struggle, disciples living through each century, each day, will be afforded the chance to share family, friends, and even their enemies just why this world is broken because of sin, and who God is, and who Jesus was. I do not think Jesus is calling us to stand at Shinjuku Station with the Bible. For some, perhaps it's okay. For many of us, it does not suit us. But which leads to the second fundamental point. We are not to be obsessed with the change. Although Jesus paints a challenging picture of what the road to the end looks like, he did not stir up worry and anguish in the disciples, but to do the exact opposite. Jesus told us the truth of what is coming so that we could have peace. It is the kind of peace a child has when their parent warns them ahead of time that thunder is coming or that the road is getting bumpy. It is the kind of peace that says to your soul, even though you have to endure, you're going to get through it. Today on the train ride, we had to pause on the train. And before it happened, the train driver instructed us, be ready, be prepared. We did not all run frightened out of the train. Rather, we were prepared for the kind of peace produced by the fact that when trouble does arrive, it proves only that Jesus is surprised by nothing and therefore capable of everything. The reason the United States Navy has training like what if Mount Fuji erupts tomorrow is not to instill fear, but a confidence so that we can better respond. Jesus' goal in getting his disciples, getting us ready for every day, is to produce a peace that understands that despite chaos, God's vision is moving forward. Spiritual situational awareness is looking around, seeing all that our Savior said was happening, and motivated by God's peace to share the good news that God's vision is secure. Such awareness will keep us from being distracted out of apathy or building a fort out of obsession. Instead, we will hug people we love, even in Japan. Pray for those who persecute us, and do something hopeful, like plant a tree. We do not have regular trainings in our churches, because disciples are to have all our senses aware of the world around us. Many of us have an exceedingly small, myopic understanding of the world, but it is time today for us to learn what is happening in Syria, what is happening in Myanmar, Palestine, parts of Africa. What about Shin Okubo? So that we can testify. In the summer of 2010, Apple introduced the iPhone 4. Among the details revealed about that phone 12 years ago was that the phone itself was getting smarter. The new iPhone had a gyroscope, an updated compass, a proximity sensor, an ambient light meter, all built into that new phone. We've gotten so accustomed. Apple, at that time, understood that their phones needed to be, and I quote, intelligent about the world around it. Your phone to be intelligent about the world around it. To be intelligent about the world sounds very much like Jesus' words today. Let us not be apathetic or obsessed. Jesus has given us each other as intelligence. So we do things like worship, pray, join together to end the suffering and challenges of this world, out of being situationally aware, to endure the change we are all having. Jesus predicted centuries ago that we need to be intelligent. For as the world around us tumbles and toils, whether Mount Fuji erupts this afternoon, or we are blessed with a beautiful snow-covered cone, we are to be growing so that we can be ready for the opportunities to testify. We are not to be apathetic or obsessed or hopeless or afraid, but trusting in God's vision, in with Him.